Good morning. It's Wednesday, August 10th, 2022, and welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live opinion, news, discussion, ranting show. I do this Monday to Friday, 11:30 until roughly around 1 o'clock. And we have a good time typically. So I'm looking at the comments scroll, seeing some folks checking in already. Make sure to make use of that. That's the whole point of doing a live show, being able to hear from you guys, interact, see some of that conversation and what's going on out there. Send me ideas, thoughts, critique. That's fine. But keep it polite. That's always the hard part. Or, it doesn't even have to be that polite, but just civil to a degree that it doesn't turn into a big scrap. It's always great to see you all checking in from all across the country there, all the way from Louisa out in Nova Scotia and out another fella in Ottawa there. We get to cover people across this country, even though we are the Western Standard. That tends to be a Western-focused thing, of course. So I'm Melissa out in Newfoundland. I love seeing all that. All right, guys, so let's see. I'll start with a couple of observations as usual, though. You got to know what to celebrate today and what to do and what's important, It's National Lazy Day. So this is a particular holiday that stands out for, government civil servants, substitute school teachers, people such as that. This is the day to kick back and just make excuses for not doing things and not do things. Lay around, celebrate your sloth. Why not? So it is National Lazy Day. We'll probably see people celebrating it and observing it all over. I know there's a lot of people who celebrate this one 365 days a year, but this is the one day of the year where it's apparently to be observed and more celebrated. So when you see them sitting on their butt, you know what it was about, right? It was just a one-off, right? All right. It's also, this is one I can take part in, Spoil Your Dog Day. Though again, I don't need necessarily a special day for me to do that. I spoil those hairballs in my house, whether I need to be told to by a national day or not. They live on a diet of shoes and disposable couches that Jane and I buy. But all the same, hey, if you haven't been paying enough attention to that fur creature in your house, today's the day to take a little extra time and spoil them, wrap it up, put some cucumbers on its eyes like that, things like that, and make sure your puppy knows it's loved. Then you can just ignore them the rest of the time. No, you shouldn't. You should spoil your dogs all the time, like I do. If you're going to have one, treat them right. Let's see, Arthur Green saying Newfoundland is not Disneyland, Cory. Yes, well, it isn't, no, but I've heard it's got a lot of entertaining aspects to it. All right, so I had a couple of good guests on today. David Millard, Haskell, he's a social scientist and university professor out in, I think it's Waterloo. I got to check that in the description. And we're going to talk about critical race theory and some of the battles going on in Ontario schools and school boards. This basically ideology is really getting shoved in. It's been an American thing, but it's coming up here as well. And it's really dividing a lot of people and causing a lot of angst. So it'll be a good discussion. And then Western Standard columnist David Krayden is going to come on. And we're going to talk about his last few columns. He mostly writes on all things Ottawa and, of course, Trudeau, Poilievre, all that sort of stuff. He's got a lot of opinions in that opinion section of the Western Standard. So for today's ramble, what I got to go on about, yes, is reviewing last night's UCP frontrunners debate that was held at the Rooftop YYC pub downtown here in Calgary. I was given the task of sitting there with a timer and a sheet, so I wasn't terribly much of a visible part of it, but I like to think it was integral. So to start with, the venue, though, was awesome. If you haven't been there, it's essentially a large rooftop greenhouse in downtown Calgary. There are bars on each side of a big, long space with a food section in the back, and it makes efficient service despite the place being packed, and it was with attendees. It's a unique spot, and I'd highly recommend it to folks if they're having a pint in downtown Calgary. Check it out. It's a good place. The stage, though, was somewhat small, and that's part of the reason that we limited the debate to 3 contenders. It's perfect for a band, but it would never have accommodated 7 people spread out in debate format. The only other downside was the occasional ambulances passing by and interrupting the debate. With all of us being essentially inside a giant tent, you do get a lot of peripheral noise from the outside. I mean, to pat our own backs, though, the debate went great. Aside from moderator Derek Fildebrand getting a little mixed up in assigning the opening statements, he maintained flow and order during the affair excellently, and it was very engaging. It was a good watch. There were no weird gimmicks, no sad trombones, no intervention cards. Questions were presented, and occasional extra rebuttals were allowed when a candidate one had signaled out another. While there were some shots fired, I think things remained relatively civil between the candidates, actually. I know it feels unfair to exclude 4 out of 7 candidates in an event like this. But there can be no doubt that having only the presumptive top 3 in the stage made for a much better debate and than the official party one, including all 7 candidates when they did that. It allowed for more questions and direct discourse to be covered. Now, with independent polling, I'll just cover it one more time. Brian Jean, Daniel Smith, and Travis Taze all are well beyond the remaining 4 candidates in support among the members. So nothing's impossible, but it's very unlikely any of the remaining contenders are going to fill that gap. Todd Loewen was in attendance. He was there last night. I chatted with him, and he was certainly well received by everybody. And when the subject of his ejection from caucus came up in the debate, all of the candidates on the stage made it clear he'd be welcome back, though they did make it clear they're also going to leave that to the caucus to decide. And Todd's a congenial, smart man, and if a 4th candidate would have been added to the mix, he would have fit in quite well. All 3 candidates, they presented themselves well and solidly. I mean, I didn't really feel that any single one stood out, not like that first debate anyways, and could be considered an outright winner. In the room, it was clear, I mean, in reading the room, the supporters were dominated, the room was dominated by Daniel Smith supporters. I mean, there were cheers and occasional boos. And again, it was typically cheers for Smith and boos for anybody being contrary to her. But Taves and Jean were both very well represented with supporters in the room as well. Now, in the official party debate in Medicine Hat, Smith was the clear target as she sustained attacks from every candidate. And last night's debate, I thought it was more Travis Taves who was more on the defensive. I mean, he's the clear establishment candidate, and he was facing off against basically 2 party outsiders. It was a tough line to straddle. Taves has to distance himself from the UCP actions that led to the ousting of Kenney, while he'd also been a senior cabinet minister during those years. Now, being a Western Standard debate, Ottawa versus Alberta, the theme was, of course, dominant. All candidates, of course, agreed that Alberta's getting a raw deal in Confederation and it needs to change. Smith stuck to and continued to defend her proposed Sovereignty Act, calling for the province to refuse to cooperate with any federal actions or policies that might be detrimental to Alberta. Brian Jean used the word autonomy generously, and that's the main theme of his campaign. And he often expressed we need constitutional reform in Canada and felt it could be achieved through the courts. He often made legal references and reminded the crowd a lot of his background in law. Taves took an approach embracing more negotiation and compromise. Again, that middle of the road, more of the same old as we've done, maybe strongly worded letters. He spoke on how things could be improved, though, by working with other provinces to bring about more united front when it comes to battle with Ottawa. Party unity, that discussion got tough, and that's where Smith was taken to task by both Jean and Taves for disastrous floor crossing in 2014 that arguably led to the 4-year term of the Rachel Notley government the following year. Jean and Taves didn't have the easiest job in presenting themselves as unifiers either, though. Taves is the establishment candidate in a party that just kicked out its own leader. And Jean took part in an extended campaign to encourage the ejection of that leader. I mean, he fostered a lot of division. It's easier to tear a party apart than to unify it. So whoever wins the race is going to have their work cut out for them. Now, firearms, healthcare, self-defense, free press, and abortion, yeah, it was covered, were all debated as well. I'm not going to break down into all of those or it'll take up the whole show. What I will conclude is with stating it was a very good debate with a lot of ground covered. If a person's undecided in this race, they can get a really clear picture in watching that debate of where the top 3 contenders stand on the issues. So the debate is in full. It's fully available on all of the Western Standard social media channels, and I suggest taking the time to watch it when you can. It's an enjoyable watch, and even as one cynical political watcher told me, she was surprised it was a 2-hour debate. The time actually flew by, and because it was engaging as opposed to being more droning than a lot of other past debates can be. So check it out on the YouTube channel, the Facebook. We have it on Rumble. We streamed it everywhere, guys. And it'll help you make up your mind, at least among those 3 candidates, on who you may want to support. All right, let's get on to the other person who was sitting around there covering that debate all night, and that was Dave Naylor, our news editor. How's it going, Dave?
Oh, it was good, Cory. It was a fun night. You were the best timekeeper I ever saw. You held up that yellow sheet and you held up the red sheet and you gave it a bit of a shake. And wow, did you ever have those candidates under control?
Thanks. I spent a lot of time rehearsing, and I was sitting around in the parking lot outside. It kind of freaked people out, wondering what I was doing out there, but I'm glad it paid off.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna have a whole bunch of follow-up stories coming from that debate. Derek asked a whole bunch of questions on different sections, and we're going to have roundup stories, hopefully with video clips of each question and what the candidates said. And yeah, it was certainly a fun, lively debate. even other media said it was the best debate they've seen during the campaign. So that was nice to see. Other stuff going on today. Our Mike Thomas has got a column up there at the moment saying he's fed up with lying politicians who lie about even their lies. So he's suggesting we bring in a program to license politicians. You have to have a car license, you have to have a gun license, but you don't need any kind of license to run for public office. And excuse me, Mike says that should change a bit. Maybe let him take a few political science courses and bone up on what politics is all about. Other stuff, the Danish government has announced an end to COVID vaccinations for anyone under 18. The government says children are not really at risk for getting serious illness from COVID, so they've stopped any sort of vaccination program. One of those separate stories I mentioned is already up there on the website, and that's what the UCP candidates said about the Liberals' gun grab and how they've now banned handguns and they're coming for every other gun. So we've got a story up there already from Arthur on what the three candidates are going to do to try and stop that. We've also got a Krayden column and another political story out of Ottawa, a poll showing Poilievre is the most popular conservative leadership candidate amongst conservatives, but with the rest of Canada, it's Jean Charest. So it's just another question of, I guess, Poilievre's electability in a general election. So busy day, Cory, already. Lots of other stories on the site for readers' perusal, and a whole mess of them to come this afternoon.
Right on. Well, always lots to look forward to. I'll let you get hammering back at it. I know it was kind of late for all of us last night, so a little groggy today working on it. But
yeah, I think I may have a nap at my desk while you're gone.
Well, it is lazy day, so this is the day to do it.
There you go.
Right on. Thanks, Dave. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor, hard at it there. And yes, lots of coverage stories coming out as they're still working on kind of breaking down and figuring out what happened to that debate and who said what as well. We've got reporters across the country writing stuff on all sorts of issues, and our columnists. Like he mentioned Dave Krayden, he's going to be on a little later. And I just noticed Arthur Green commenting in the comment scroll. He's our Alberta writer. He wrote a story covering the debate as well. This is where I like to remind everybody the reason we can do all this is because you guys have been subscribing. Independent media, we rely on you. We don't take any tax dollars. We won't take any tax dollars. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if we did. And the reason we can do that, though, is because you guys have been subscribing, and it's really appreciated. Thousands of people have ponied up to, purchase our service. Like I said, we're not asking for charity. We're producing something. We're just charging a fee for it. So if you want full, unfettered access to all of those columns and news stories as they break, all that stuff, it's $99 for a year, $10 a month, free trial. Take one out, guys. It helps us keep, this independent media going, so you don't have to listen to that garbage on CTV and CBC any longer. And we can actually counter the legacy media and the terrible coverage they offer all of us. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please get on there and subscribe. And to those who already have, thanks, guys. We really do appreciate it here. So let's see, looking a little further on to some of that, day of laziness, the day to celebrate it. And here we see a part-time senator has been getting work. These senators, I kind of celebrated them because they have been holding the government to account, at least some of them. There's been some Senate committees and some critique and good things happening out there. But then, of course, there's some of them that are just the lazy appointed bums that we've known them well for. I don't know if people remember Andy Thompson that much. It's a bit of a blast in the past, but back in the 90s, he was actually in Mexico for most of his time in the Senate. He would only show up for a couple of days a year, just a bare minimum. Of course, he's collecting six figures, a massive pension. And boy, he was indignant when he finally got called out on it. I mean, he was upset. How dare you guys question me on this? This one sounds interesting. This is a Liberal senator, and they call them independent senators. Trudeau called it that. He says they're independent. They're not really party anymore. That's not true. They answer to the guy who appointed him. And this is a Liberal senator, Sarabjit Marwaf. He's from Ontario. So he's already making his good Senate coin there. But also he's a director with Onyx Corporation. And he's didn't disclose what his director's fees were with there. But some of his filings did show some of the money he's made. I mean, he's with Cineplex as a director as well. So he's got so much extra time. He can do all these directorships while he's a full-time senator, apparently, too. Well, as the story says, he's part-time, obviously. If you're going to do that on the side, there's nothing saying they can't, because, well, they got the extra time. Let's get out there and do it. So he drew in 2022 or 2020, $341,000 in fees. This is on top of his money made as a senator, as a director for Cineplex. And George Weston, he also, I guess in 2019, he did resign one at TELUS where he was making $228 a year. And this is all stuff on top of what he's making as a senator. Man, what a multitasker this guy is. He obviously, because he's serving Canadians so well in the Senate and so efficiently that he can do all this stuff on the side and make hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars there. And then you got to wonder, why? Why would a corporation want to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to have somebody serving on a board if they're so busy at the Senate? It's almost like maybe they're thinking they could be buying some goodwill from the Liberal Party, doesn't it? Yes, our system is broken and it's ugly in many ways. And, there's no accountability. There's no way to get rid of this clown. All we can do is expose him. He's appointed. He's appointed until I don't know what mandatory retirement is in the Senate, 100 or something, or it seems like it. There is an age of 75 or 80 or something like that. But we can't, it's not like 4-year terms or anything else. Again, it always astounded when I used to work in the States and talk to Americans about, a senator in the States, that's a very powerful political position. I mean, there's only 2 senators for every state, whether it's Wyoming or New York. And it really helps balance things, between that regional and population split there. And they're elected, of course. I mean, they're not that their services or system is perfect by any means, but at least they're elected. And an American citizen has a chance to campaign against and vote against these guys or for or whatever they want. In Canada, they are appointed. We hold our elections in Alberta, but of course the Liberals just ignore whoever we choose. And these guys are appointed not just, for short terms, they're appointed for life. And the Americans, how can that possibly, that's not democratic, that's insane. Yes, it is. That's the Canadian system. The Senate really is kind of pointless. I mean, it's supposed to be there, theoretically, again, to balance, you got the House of Commons, it's based on population, somewhat, except for exceptions made for Quebec because they whine the loudest. And the Senate, which should balance that, doesn't at all. I mean, it's massively stacked for the eastern half of the country. They aren't elected. And some of them, as with this guy, is ineffective. This is, for those of us who may remember the Reform Party days, the Triple E Senate was the big call. It was elected, effective, and what the hell was the other one? Why am I forgetting? Efficient, I think. Yes or no? Man, why am I forgetting one of the E's in the Triple E? I'm losing my mind today. Elected, efficient. Oh, equal. Yes, of course. So that's so many senators per province. We never got any of those things. And one would hope if you had them elected, you'd kind of get some of the effective no matter what, because then they actually have to answer to somebody. And the equal thing, well, that would take constitutional reform. That was some interesting things from the debate last night, as I said. Everybody kind of agreed that Canada's broken. Jean kept saying we have to open the Constitution. It's the only way to fix things. But we could do it through the courts. Okay, fair enough. But he was saying Danielle Smith's and others, her plan with the Sovereignty Act won't work because it clashes with the Constitution. Well, everything does. So, I mean, maybe that's the catalyst. I mean, we got to have something. We got to smack against that constitutional wall before we start talking about ripping it open. Taves, though, feels we can work within the Constitution. Look, the Constitution of Canada is broken and it stinks. I don't know what's going to change it. Well, I know what's going to change it. It's going to take a province actually becoming independent or becoming very close to it. Until then, all we can do is tweak within this broken, rotten, stacked system that basically funnels the resources and power towards central Canada and treats the outward regions as colonies. But we can discuss, and people are afraid of big change, and we try just have to keep pressing and doing what we can with it, and hopefully we can get some progress towards, I guess, a better provincial government when the time comes. So. Again, before I get on to the next guest, I just want to remind everybody, check it out, of course, after the show. But the debate really was good. Having just 3 of them and having that sort of format, it really did come up with some good discussion and things covered. So I will direct you to our social media channels. Okay, let's bring in Professor David Haskell. He's a social scientist and professor in Ontario. Maybe he'll correct me. I believe it was Waterloo. I didn't write my notes right. And we want to talk about critical race theory and how it's been applying in some battles with Ontario schools and school boards. it's not just an American issue, and we might call it different things, but it's all coming up here as well. So welcome to the show, Professor Haskell. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you wrote a piece recently in C2C Journal, and it was basically on parental pushback, and the fight against critical race theory coming in with the Ontario School Board. And that Ontario School Board has already had a few flare-ups with some kind of unusual occurrences, I guess you could say. They're quite something. But in the sense of critical race theory, I mean, a lot of people think that's just an American phenomenon, but obviously it's an issue up here as well.
Yeah, it is. And what people don't often realize is they don't tend to use the words critical race theory. I mean, they've cottoned on to the fact that people don't like it, that the United States certainly had a backlash among parents. And so here in Canada, educators who are in favor of things like critical race theory don't call it that at all. They'll call it things like anti-racism education. And part of that will also be white privilege instruction. So parents have probably heard about that, that their kids are being taught about white privilege, or that their kids are being exposed to anti-racism education. But what they need to know is that the foundation of that really is critical race theory, and it's just the practical applications of it. In terms of anti-racism education, for example, we've got these books out there, How to Be Anti-Racist. One was written by a fellow, he's at Boston University, his name's Ibram Kendi. And it essentially says that discrimination based on skin color is a good thing. He will say that if it is anti-racist discrimination and it's taking on past wrongs, past historical wrongs, then that's a good thing. So essentially, with anti-racism education, we're actually seeing students being told discrimination can be a good thing.
Yeah, it's kind of gone a bizarro full circle. I mean, I've seen that we're just adding to division. I mean, I think the goal for initially, when there was problems with true systemic racism and institutionalized racism, was that race just wouldn't be a matter anymore. We'll get to a point where it's irrelevant. We are treating each other as equal. And now we're kind of dividing each other on the basis of anti-racism. It's counterintuitive, but that's where this sort of theory starts to come about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, where it is most insidious is this teaching of white privilege, which is seen across all the boards in Ontario and certainly all across the West and everywhere in Canada, everywhere in the US. And this idea of white privilege, just in case people aren't familiar with it, it essentially teaches that if you're white, many of the successes, or maybe even the majority of your successes, are due to your white skin. Now, conversely, it's equally damaging to students of color because it teaches that no matter how hard they work, the deck is stacked against them and they can't succeed. So in that, we have this subtle racism of low expectations. And the thing that I pointed out in the article that you mentioned in the C2C Journal is that the research surrounding things like diversity education, anti-racism education, and in particular white privilege, the research actually shows that it doesn't do what it intends to do. In fact, it does harm.
Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody feels, kids are at a developmental stage at that point. They're very impressionable. If you're being taught at a young age that you're at a disadvantage, I mean, I guess for some it would inspire people to rise above and push past that. But for others, it might give a sense of defeatism and actually, it'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's not good for anybody. No.
And you know what? You should have been a social scientist yourself, because what you're talking about is a really well-studied phenomenon called stereotype threat. Now, stereotype threat says exactly what you're saying, and we've got a lot of studies surrounding it. It's essentially that if you keep telling students of color or people of color that the deck is stacked against them, then they'll begin to believe it, and then they will underperform. The interesting thing is, when you have people of color who are immigrants to Canada, for example, and they don't buy into that particular false notion that the deck is stacked against them, they actually overperform. The latest Statistics Canada data showed that people of color actually have a greater chance of getting a university degree than white populations that have been here for decades or hundreds of years. So we're seeing that now. And really, it's a testament to this idea that the harder you work, and also your home life, if you have two parents that are together and in a solid relationship. Those are the things that matter.
Yeah, there's other social factors beyond that, and some of that does put light to it. I mean, we've seen a great success in Asian and South Asian populations, for example, and immigrants in most measures, whether it's educational or financial and such. But those factors, when you dig into it, tend to be it's a strong, supportive family unit. It's a culture very much of ambition and moving ahead, and those are beyond. I mean, if it was just purely racial disadvantages, they wouldn't be able to excel as well as they have.
Well, that's really true. And let me just give you an example from my own area. So I'm in Waterloo Region, and the Board of Education is the Waterloo Region District School Board. And we currently have a director of education who's been pushing so hard to get identity to be the key focus of the Board of Education, to the exclusion of things like basic numeracy, literacy. He's really focused on identity. And he's had some pushback on that from parents who are saying, why is this the focus? And he felt so much pressure. In fact, he had to write this op-ed in the local newspaper. And in it, he goes on to say that we need to focus on identity because, and I'm going to try and get the quote as close as possible. He says, it's no secret since the advent of public education, identity has been a predictor of outcome. Well, I looked at that and I knew it was just completely at odds with the research because it's simply not so. In terms of identity, it's one of the worst predictors, the most unreliable predictors of academic outcome. So I quickly shot out a letter to the editor. And among other things, I noted that in the UK, they'd just done the largest study of the effect of race on academic outcome. The UK Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities put this out, I think it was March or May 2021. Anyway, they went on to say that the evidence shows conclusively family influence, socioeconomic background, culture, and religion have the most significant impact on things like academic achievement. And it was specific, they noticed this specifically, they say, but racism was one of the least important factors in all of this. So anyway, I shot this out, but you'd think that research would have an effect on the leaders in our educational community, but I think that they're blinded by ideology.
Yeah, and again, we just get the most worried. I think perhaps that's where it's finally getting this pushback, because now it's actually targeting young children. It's not even in the levels of our post-secondary where we've always seen kind of some woke lunacy taking hold over the years, but at least those are grown, people, students and so on, who can make up their own mind. But when we start to bring these ideologies into the classrooms of kids at such a young age, and on theories that are ideologically based, as you said, I mean, it can cause a lot of damage. I feel for the white children who are in class too, are almost being shamed, and called out of the group. And again, that's the opposite of what we should have ever done. I mean, there was shaming and abuse against minority children in the past, and it was terrible. But turning it around and doing it now with children who aren't people of color isn't helping the situation whatsoever.
Yeah, and it cuts both ways. I mean, the students of color are also being told, you're not good enough, right? I mean, it's racism both ways. And you're absolutely right to say that the effect on young people is significant. Again, I came before my school board and I presented them with the research. And this research is detailed in the piece that I wrote in C2C Journal as well. So if your audience wants to take a look, they can go there. But let me just point out a few things. So there was a 2019 study that was done in the Journal of Experimental Psychology General. That was the name of it. And the lead researcher was from Colgate University. Anyway, he wanted to look at what effect would teaching white privilege have on the attitudes of students. And well, they found out that it did absolutely nothing to make people more sympathetic to poor Black or people of color. Didn't do anything good. But what the researchers did find, and I'm going to read the quote I have up here. I left it on my screen. The researchers concluded learning about white privilege reduces sympathy, increases blame, and decreases external attributions for white people struggling with poverty. So in short, what they found was that teaching about white privilege doesn't do any good, but it does do harm, and it actually makes students more hostile toward poor whites.
Yeah, and the division doesn't serve anybody. The later part of your article, though, does cover, I mean, the growing resistance to this kind of ideology. I mean, this hasn't gone unopposed in Ontario or in the United States, for that matter. Are parents finally standing up? I mean, one of the problems we've had is a lot of apathy when it comes to electing school boards. People don't pay attention. Most people can't even name their local school trustee. You think there's going to be maybe more participation, people paying attention now that things are kind of getting a little off the rails?
I know there will be. For example, I was concerned. I've got a daughter still in high school here in the Waterloo region, and I hear what she's being told in class, and I know that it is empirically incorrect, the things that she's being taught by these so-called anti-racism educators. So I took it upon myself to start a local chapter of the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Now, even though that sounds kind of on the left, it's actually dedicated to preserving the ideas put forward by Martin Luther King Jr. that we should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. It's really about being pro-human. Anyway, I started this chapter of Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, or FAIR, and I've had hundreds of parents show interest. I've got a solid, just under 100 who are solid members, and then we'll get more and more interest from just supporters. And I'm not the only group. There's Action for Canada. There's Parents as First Educators. And each of these groups is searching for trustees, people who would be candidates for trustees, to bring back sanity to our boards. And the response has been overwhelming. And not just in Waterloo region, but across Ontario. And I'm not sure what's happening in municipal or trustee elections across Canada, but I can only assume that parents, for the good of their children, are finally waking up and they're taking action.
Well, that's it. And I mean, I kind of like the naming, whether it's left, right, it doesn't matter. I mean, a Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, because that's what the ideologues will always throw back. If you question it, you're immediately labeled as a racist. Well, a racist. I mean, if you oppose our anti-racist view, it means you thus must be pro-racist. Well, no, and it's a lazy way to frame a debate or a way to shut one down. And, we need to have rational discussion on this.
We do. And I think that they've overplayed their hand. And now parents who typically have a lot more common sense than the people who have been indoctrinated through education programs, they're seeing what is actually going on. And they're saying your definitions simply do not make sense, because in our hearts, we all know that discrimination based on skin color is a terrible thing. And we almost got rid of it. We were so close. And then suddenly we have these woke activists who are coming back and saying, no, you know what? Actually, let's bring back discrimination based on skin color. Well, this is just playing with fire. And again, I'm all about the data. I want to know what actually will do the most good in our society to bring unity. And the things that they're promoting under the guise of anti-racism education or critical race theory or white privilege, it doesn't do good. It does harm.
Oh, well, that's it. Being about the data, I mean, we're seeing examples. We've seen, places where this has been brought in. I mean, hey, if we saw great successes and these graduates coming out that are unified and functional and happy and get along with each other, then great. Well, let's carry on. But there really hasn't been any evidence of that. Again, and as far as I can see, it's actually adding to division, no matter what they may say the motivations are.
Oh, well, for sure. And again, the data is just so ample. If these people who are running our education systems would just allow it to be presented to parents. I'll give you another example. So this is a great one. There's a professor at Princeton. Her name is Elizabeth Paluck, Paluck, and she did a 2001 study. It was published in the Annual Review of Psychology, which is one of the top psychology journals in the world. And so she does this meta-analysis of 400 existing studies. And what she wanted to see is, what good does diversity training do? Now, keep in mind that things like anti-racism education and white privilege, these are the core modules of diversity training. Whether it's done in a business or in a school, it's the same stuff. So they're trying to look at these 400 studies that have already said what's being done with diversity training, and this is what they came up with. So they, after looking at these 400 papers, they saw that the bold claims that were being made were completely false. Because in terms of this kind of instruction, the average impact, and again, I'm giving the data completely from this paper, the average impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion training is zero. The impact is zero. It doesn't change you. It doesn't help. But then you've got other people like Frank Dobbin, who's a sociologist at Harvard. He said, yep, that's true. But he did his own studies. And what he looked at was, well, it doesn't do good, but does it do harm? And he says, yeah, it does. In fact, this kind of diversity training, whether it's white privilege or anti-racism education, it has a fairly good chance, I can't remember the percentage he gave, but a fairly good chance of making people more prejudiced. So it won't do good, but it can do harm. And this is what we're promoting in our schools and in our universities.
And it's terribly unfortunate. Well, I'm glad to see efforts are, being made to call it out and hopefully bring it to account. I mean, there are democratic means to change some of these school boards. Universities, that's going to be a much bigger and harder task. But at least, to keep the kids just sticking to their, I would think, a rational curriculum and trying to keep, things on the up and up there until they can grow old enough to sort some of those things out would be really important. So I appreciate you calling it out in your article and coming on to talk to us today. Where can we find more information about what you're doing and your organization?
So I would encourage people, first of all, to go to the article in C2C. And it's about CRTC. I can't remember the title, but it's parental pushback, I think is the subtitle. And it's in C2C Journal. And that actually has links in the actual article to the organizations, the grassroots community organizations that are pushing back against some of this stuff. So that's a place to go. Another place to go would be to the main website for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and look for the local chapter. There are now chapters across Canada, and find your local chapter and then work to support them.
Great. Well, yeah, it was in the C2C Journal, which is C and then the number 2C for folks Googling it. It was Parental Pushback, the Fight Against Critical Race Theory by David Millard Haskell. So if you search that out, you'll find, as you said, that the article has a lot of links and background as well for all the rest of that. So thank you again for coming on to talk about it today. And then let's hope we can return some productive rationality to our education system.
Yeah, let's hope. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you. So check that out for more information, folks. As we said, you can look that up with David Haskell and C2C Journal. And there's a lot of good stuff in C2C Journal, some good articles and columns. And it's very well sourced. And it's a discussion that's well worth having. And, I see some in the comments scroll like Terrell and Nelson said, kids don't discriminate against skin color unless they're taught to. And it begins at home. And yeah, I think that's where most of it starts. It starts in the household. I remember it so well. Like when I was younger, I lived in Northeast Calgary, and my middle son was born, and he went to school up there. And if people know Northeast Calgary, it's a very highly immigrant population up there. We were up in Whitehorn, and my son went to school. He went to kindergarten at a local school in our neighborhood up there, and I would say that the kids there were probably 80%, immigrant. I mean, they're probably born in Canada, but they were people of color. And I went to a kindergarten graduation ceremony. It was just the little things schools do and everything else in this class of 20 kids or whatever. And they were all dressed up. And there's a lot of a Sikh and Indian population there. And some of the kids were all dressed up in the traditional silks and everything. I thought it was fantastic. It was really cool. But the thing that was really neat and struck me at the time was the complete indifference to race with the kids at that level, at that age. It didn't matter. It never occurred to them. They didn't look at each other as different. I mean, they were kids. There's some kids get along with some kids and some don't and everything, but the race wasn't a factor with them yet. And I thought that was great. It really is. The kids don't care. They're just other kids. Somewhere we screw up as we start getting older. And I mean, we're all guilty of things to a degree. We got to learn things and get better with things. And I think we are getting better with things in general. We really are. But I mean, I moved later. Later on, I was living with Jane. I had changed wives, and we were in the Northwest, or just into the Northwest. I was near James Fowler High School, and that's a large high school in North Calgary, and it's got, again, a very diverse student population. And one thing, it's just anecdotal on my part, but I observed when I drive by that school quite often, and there's well over 1,000 students there, and it'd be lunchtime. Of course, there's kids everywhere. And the kids there were often, though they were sometimes mixed, but often clustered. You'd see around the schoolyard, there's this ethnic group all hanging around over in this corner, and this ethnic group in that corner, and they weren't mixing anymore. And when it was sad to see, because then I wonder, well, when did that change? How did they go from being the ones like my son in kindergarten and then getting on into high school, and suddenly you're breaking up again into different groups, and you're not necessarily getting along as you should have. You grew up together, and I think we're messing up. I think some of it's the stuff that we're being taught. Even then, I mean, I'm talking about 12 years ago, 13 years ago when I was looking around the other school. I'm talking about, even longer when my child was in kindergarten. But I think there's a natural inclination for us to just get along. And then somehow the adults, or as the kids grow, we screw it up and we split each other apart again. And it's a sad outcome. And then we get these fights. And these extremists, though, when you get into the critical race theory and crap like that and everything, they're dividing people more. And I've mentioned it on this show before. It just floored me one time a few years ago, and I heard about it. I was listening, I think CBC Radio, and I used to survey out in the field. That's all I could get. And they were celebrating the opening of this school in Toronto. It was such a landmark decision. It was so wonderful. It was a great idea. It was a school only for Black students. Wow. I mean, we think of what the civil rights movement had to do through the 50s and 60s in the United States to end the segregation and the BS and racial division of schools. And then we get to the full circle. Martin Luther King must have been doing backflips in his grave, where progressives are actually celebrating racially segregated schools. How in the hell is that making anything better for anybody when you've got schools separated by race? It's ridiculous. And part of what gets me too, you see, with some of that discussion from these activists, these extreme ones, and they're of all colors, but when they try to instill guilt upon the innocent, when they talk about, and we hear that a lot, oh, there's an inherent racism with every person who's white. No, there isn't. No, there is not. And that's very insulting, and it's very racist to say that. That's what I'm talking about when I saw those children in that kindergarten class. They didn't have it, obviously. They had to grow and gain it. All right. But yes, there's a lot to cover. And it's a difficult area, but I think we're kind of going the wrong way. I think we went on an upward curve. We got a lot better. And now we've hit this peak. There's still a lot of problems to solve. There's still a lot of intolerance out there. There's still a lot of bullying and prejudice within workplaces, even in schools. But when we start to let the more extreme people take over the discussion of it, we have more of the setting ourselves back rather than moving forward. And it's an unfortunate outcome. All right, let's talk about one of our sponsors, something a little lighter, guys. And that is Resistance Coffee Company. I mean, if you're tired of that sort of thing, leftism, woke stuff, things like that, well, Resistance Coffee Company, they're here for you. They're the counter woke. These guys make good coffee. So that's the other thing. We're not just making a political message coffee. It's good stuff. I mean, we've had it here. I've seen some of our commenters have already ordered it, and they've talked about it. I've seen no negative reviews of it. And they're a local Western Canadian company. And instead of, like I said, you go to Bed Bath & Beyond and find out that they're funding, anti-oil lunatic activists or something, Resistance Coffee, they give 10% of every purchase to organizations that are fighting for constitutional freedoms of Canadians. So your money, and you can see it. You can see where they donate that right on their website at resistancecoffee.com. And if you get your first order from them, you get 10% off if you go to resistancecoffee.com/triggered to make that first order. And they got all this swag. Like I said, I've been loving this Liberal Tears cup. I changed my Twitter profile to me drinking Liberal Tears. It's been well received from the Liberals I tweet with. And they have T-shirts and, of course, just creative names. The Liberal Tears is the name of their medium roast coffee. Black Gold, I think, is their dark roast. Empty Promises, of course, is their decaf. So check them out, guys. resistancecoffee.com. And as you can see, they got to defund the CBC one as well. And if you go to .com/triggered, you get 10% off that first order. They'll deliver it right to your home and make it convenient for you. You can feel good about the coffee you're drinking and enjoy a good coffee while you're at it. All right. So let's see. Speaking of our money again, that's kind of where I was before I got to the last guest. This is something coming up in the story. The Sunshine List Club, I guess a list club, whatever way you want to call it. So these are senior civil servants who make over $100,000 a year. And it sounds like they've been increasing over the course of the pandemic. Everybody else has been suffering. Everybody else tightened their belts, unless you're in the civil service. and showed the total number of federal employees making at least 100,000 has gone. This is from 2019 until 2022. Went from 69,000 who were making over 100,000 a year to 114,000, a 66% gain. So now, there's more of them and they're making more money and they're doing less. What are we getting from our federal civil servants? Passport waiting list times for months, people canceling trips. Immigration is backlogged with hundreds of thousands of applications. These clowns are some of the most incompetent people on earth, but they're making a fortune. They're milking us dry, you guys. And they're taking more and more and more all the time. So, again, that's why I have Terrazano on so often, and people from the Taxpayers Federation, they dig in and bring this up because we need to know you're getting robbed. When you hear from clowns like Trudeau and apologists for him say, look, the economy's doing better. We got more jobs. Kind of like when Notley was running Alberta too. Look at all the new jobs. They were all civil service jobs. They're reaching into the pockets of hardworking people in the private sector. They're sucking the money out of it. And then they're paying bloated union positions to sit around and do next to nothing and collect money. This is their day. Remember, it's the laziness day. Either way, it's growing, and it's growing fast because it gives the government incentive. Look at all the people we're employing. Yes. Well, it's just a work for welfare program is what it is. The people, Pamela Jones-Kennedy saying, yeah, CPP and OAS aren't rising. Yeah, if you're on a fixed income, you're in some serious trouble right now. You're having a hell of a hard time if you're on a fixed income. But boy, if you're a civil servant, you're doing pretty good for yourself. Here's one more from the irony file. The stories keep coming up on it, and I love watching this outrage going on with this Commons Ethics Committee, where they're still furious upon finding out the RCMP has been using spyware to surveil members of Parliament. Again, like I said, so many members of Parliament really didn't give a crap when it was the general public who were getting their privacy invaded, that were getting surveillance from the RCMP ostensibly to, protect the Liberal government. Well, now they're mad. Oh, wait a minute. We didn't know you were going to look into our phones too. What would you expect, you peckerheads? Think a little harder before you empower these agencies to get in and get onto our private devices. But now they're mad. But here's something funny. They voted because the RCMP wouldn't even admit, and they won't share the data with them. So they voted 6-5 on the committee to order the RCMP to comply and share that surveillance data. But I wonder, the 5 who voted against it, I got to wonder what they had on their phones that they're terrified of. They don't want that data shared whatsoever. I got a feeling, we'll see some perhaps interesting things from our members of Parliament. They couldn't even do Zoom meetings without taking a leak halfway through or walking around naked. So just imagine some of the stuff these guys have got on their phones. But I do love this reality check that seems to have hit them, right? It's once it hits the members of Parliament, now it's an important issue. Wasn't a big deal before. Well, yeah, you guys got to live with the same crap as us. And now you got to deal with that RCMP who's beholden to Justin Trudeau rather than the citizens or actually you guys. Here's another side story. So this was interesting. This is more of a trend in things we see. But so a number of people got arrested. There was a big skirmish in the downtown east side of Vancouver the other day. And if people have been out to East Hastings, East Hastings was always a slum even 30 years ago. That was the area where I think at some point it was some of the worst in North America for heroin use and addicts. And now it's just a horror story. It goes for blocks and blocks, tent city everywhere. It's a mess. It's a progressive paradise, in other words. But, we've got an addiction epidemic across all of North America. So, of course, the hot spots that were already bad have gotten even worse. But the thing that but contributes to this, and when it's to the skirmish, so they're trying to remove some tents and structures along the street in the neighborhood because it was just too much. And there'd been disturbances. Again, we can't keep pretending these are harmless addicts, harmless people. It's not bothering anybody when they sit up. It doesn't, no BS. And if you got to live near it, it's a problem. And somebody on meth is very potentially dangerous. They also steal to feed their habit. I know there are people who are sick and they're in the grasps of addiction, and they should have some sympathy, and we should be trying to help them. But at the same time, let's quit pretending that they're harmless and that we could just let them set up anywhere. But these activists get in, and we're seeing that in Portland and Seattle and in Vancouver, where they actually fight any efforts to try and clean this up. And that's what happened. So this was a brawl, and it wasn't just the people in the homeless camp. It was these extremist activists who were fighting back against the police because the police were trying to arrest and clean up some people who were causing problems down there. But it's gone mad. We do have a problem. We've got homeless people. They need somewhere to go. They need somewhere to live where they're not causing problems for others. It's not like we can just stick them into an apartment building. It's not like, they're ready to roll. But we can't let them just set up random tent cities and shanty towns everywhere. It turns into a disaster every time. And it's really unfair to the other people living there. Again, I've proposed, fine, take some warehouses, make them into, concrete floors and the works, but with toilets you can hose out. Just, we're responsible for the needs. They won't freeze to death. They won't starve to death. Here's the basics. And then get them there and off the damn streets. Minimal, yes, but it's still better than some feces-loaded tent city where they're shooting up and raping each other. Because yes, the crimes against each other are horrific in those tent camps as well. And then we can work from there, hopefully, on reforming people. But to have these white bread activists up there standing around, pushing back on police when the police are just trying to do their job and make a neighborhood a little safer and clean up a tent city that's gone out of control. Because that's what it is. It's these hipsters, it's these cellar-dwelling, spoiled kids who think they're doing the world a favor, who dive in there and do these things. Get out of there, guys. You're not doing anybody any favors. It's a mess. It's unfair to the citizens of the area. It's unfair to the police. But these skirmishes we see happening all over. As I said, we see these sorts of videos and scenes throughout basically throughout the West Coast, whether it's Canada or the United States. I think part of the reason is the nicer climate. I mean, if you're going to live on the streets, you don't want to do it in Winnipeg, though they got their share of it as well. Because wintertime, it's horrific. If you can get to the West Coast, it's relatively easy. You're living, at least as far as the weather's concerned. Let's see. I'll go into something a little lighter. This was just an interesting story I kind of rattled across. If people are into archaeology and things like that, it's really kind of cool. I guess there's these ancient knife coins that were found, or I guess they've been around for a while, but somebody deciphered them. They're 2,300 years old, and they're Chinese. And they're these knife-looking things. I guess they were a form of currency. They call them knife coins. And they actually had formulas on them for metallurgy, like for making different bronze and mixtures and things like that. We thought were long lost. It's just kind of really cool stuff. We're finding old formulas from thousands of years ago that were long gone. I can imagine how hard it was to translate these things. Every language changes and everything, but it's just if we're talking to kind of an interesting, kitschy sort of story, that one's out there. It's speaking of ancient cultures and ancient technologies. The Chinese, of course, thousands of years ago, were very, very advanced. So that was in the Journal of Antiquity. We're just covering a few things. My guest, David Krayden, I believe is going to be coming on pretty quickly. I think he's just getting set up out there a little bit with his computer out that way. I see him in the lobby. He should be ready to roll pretty soon, but I'm not quite sure if he's set. If David can give me a wave if he's ready to roll, we can pop him in. But if they're still sorting stuff out, we'll hang on. Okay, we'll hang on a moment. So let's see here what else we got. Yes, the Bay du Nord offshore oil projects in Newfoundland. People might remember that, because the federal government rejected an oil field proposed project in Alberta to expand in the oil sands, but they approved the one offshore in Newfoundland. I got no problem with the one in Newfoundland. Go for it. Get drilling. Of course, it's just that double standard is that grates. But of course, environmental groups are not taking this because those lunatics are opposing oil and gas development everywhere all the time, no matter what. So they're even going after now, I guess it's a Norwegian company that's taking part in this offshore project, even though it's a Canadian one. And the environmentalists are protesting over in Norway, trying to shut it down. We got to quit pandering to these guys. They want us to freeze in the dark. They want us to starve and freeze in the dark. They're irrational. They're insane. The world's in an energy crisis, and these ding-dongs are out there trying to shut down efforts to bring in more energy. Look, get out there. If you're that dedicated, invent the perfect solar panel. Find a windmill that'll do the trick for us then, and we'll bring it in. But until then, we need oil and gas, and it's impacting the safety and standard of living of millions and billions of people in the world. We cannot get rid of these sources of energy yet. We're not even close. But we keep, it was one thing if you got a bunch of goofy hippies who are out protesting something and they're a tiny minority. So what? Big deal. The problem is we've got corporate heads who are taking these clowns seriously now. We've got politicians who are taking them seriously. In fact, one of them is Canada's environment minister. He is one of these extreme activists, and he's in a very strong position of power. So don't consider it a done deal, guys, out there in Newfoundland. uh, until that thing gets rolling, these activists are working their hardest to shut that down. And thankfully, it's funny because, again, Canada, I talked about that before. We won't even touch our own Arctic. We're too scared of our environmentalists. But Norway's expanding their Arctic development. Russia's expanding their Arctic development. It's all going to come on stream, and we're getting left behind. Okay, I'm going to speak to my sponsor, one more sponsor, before I get to my guest there. It looks like David's almost set up there with a little bit of fighting and getting around. That's all right. So our other sponsor is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They also sponsored last night's debate that I was talking about earlier, and it went really well. And we talk about a good, worthy group to join, guys. If you enjoy firearms, if you are a target shooter, a hunter, a collector, or if you just enjoy the rights of other people, that's the thing we got to learn. Support other people's rights, even if you don't take advantage of it. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association is the group for you guys. You got to take out a membership with them. We're seeing they're using orders in council to steal your property, to take your firearms. They're trying to disarm this nation, and they will. They're going to succeed if we don't stand up with it for ourselves. And the way to do it is in numbers, and that means joining a group like the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Tony Bernardo runs it. He's been doing a fantastic job as an advocate. There's all sorts of other resources for you as a firearm owner as well, for links to upcoming shows or events and things like that. So check them out. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They're at cssa-cila.org, and take out a membership for your own sake, guys, because we got to stand up for your rights or they will be taken. All right, let's get over to Ottawa there and bring in Mr. David Krayden and see what's happening over on his front. Hey, David, how's it going?
Good. I had a little sound problem here, Cory. So
no, that's all right. Yeah, no, I can see. I see you down in the lobby below, scrambling. So I let you be. You're far from alone with it. We all have those moments. But things are getting more user friendly all the time. So thanks for coming to talk to us today. Lots to talk about as usual out on the federal front. I guess your most recent one. I mean, we'll kind of start with that, and that's the polling and such with regards to the federal Conservative Party of Canada race.
Yeah, I noticed this morning, and I think the Western Standard picked up on this as well from this Canadian Press story. I really found this Leger poll to be completely haywire, because it's basically no more accurate than some online poll where you ask a question and you take the first 100 responses and that's your poll. So it's completely inaccurate, and there wasn't even a positive or negative in terms of accuracy, because it wasn't accurate. And I took two things from it. First of all, the 44% of Conservative voters apparently favor Pierre Poilievre, 17% favor Jean Charest. So I said, hey, you add that up, that means where's the other 39%? And it certainly wasn't going equally to the other three contenders. So I don't know, the number crunching has some problems. But what really got me is the suggestion that Canadians, writ large, Canadians as viewed and defined by the Liberal Party of Canada, don't like Pierre Poilievre, and they like Jean Charest. He's a nice red Tory in the comfy sweater. And why are Conservatives backing the wrong horse? So I found this poll to be very suspect, but at the same time, expect more of this in the next couple of months, because Pierre is going to win this Conservative leadership race. I mean, if you have any money on it, good for you. If you're just interested in political science, I don't think there's any way he can lose, because he's put the most work into it. He's certainly got the biggest crowds when he's out on the hustings. And I think, as I said in a previous column, the endorsement by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper was the icing on the cake in terms of getting people into his camp. So, but he's not liked by the mainstream media, by the state media. He's considered to be too dangerous, whatever the heck that means, and can mean anything they want it to mean, of course. But I really do think we're going to see a lot of smearing going on against Pierre Poilievre, because I think he's going to beat Justin Trudeau, if Justin's still around for this next election. And if, as a lot of people have been theorizing, we might have a fall election, I think Pierre is going to have the momentum from winning the leadership race, and he's going to walk into this election fully prepared and warmed up and ready to go. And I think he's got this election beaten if it happens soon.
Well, and those discussions, they come up basically anytime there's a candidate coming up who's unapologetically conservative. We're seeing that here in Alberta as well, where it appears, anyways, that Daniel Smith is got a pretty good lead going on in the leadership race. So they start saying, well, sure, the conservative policies are good, and yes, they make sense, and their common sense, but they'll never win with the public. So we can't go with that candidate because we can't sell conservative policies to the public. And I think it might scare some people away, but typically, despite what people say, if they could be believed, we never would have had a Ralph Klein. We never would have had a Ronald Reagan. You can sell conservative policies to an electorate. You just have to sell it right.
Well, that's very true. And I'm furious to some degree. I mean, I never get that furious with people. I get furious with ideas. But the idea that Poilievre is somehow wrong to talk about freedom. I saw this the other day on Natasha Carradin's LinkedIn site, and she was doing an interview with a Calgary radio station, which will remain nameless, with a host that I know very well and have never gotten along with. But she said the subject of the conversation was going to be how talking about freedom offends some Canadians. And I said, you call yourself a conservative? This is what Poilievre's campaign has been all about. And as far as I'm concerned, this is what conservatism is all about. It's about freedom. It's about liberty. And if we don't talk about positive conservatism, as Ronald Reagan did, better than anybody else, I think, in the late 20th century, we're not going to win this, because we're going to be phony Tories. We're going to be phony liberals. We're going to be the same thing we were in the last election, which was not sure where we were politically. Maybe somewhere to the right of Justin Trudeau, but not really in terms of real policy. So I get very frustrated when I hear conservatives say we need Jean Charest because he's a nice guy, and Canadians all like him, except he's got the same policies as the current government, as far as I'm concerned. He's no different from Aaron O'Toole, who we had in there recently. And we do not need another liberal leading the Conservative Party. We need a decision in this next election. We need a choice. And Pierre Poilievre is certainly going to provide that choice. Is he the only candidate that's providing that choice? No. I like most of the candidates in this race, but I think he's the only one that can win. It's going to be a very nasty race in the next election, because they're going to throw everything at Pierre that they can possibly come up with in terms of him being too extreme, too right-wing, too dangerous, too populist, blah, 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 too much like Donald Trump. You wait for it. It's all going to come out. But I think Pierre is astute enough, articulate enough, and good on his feet enough to come back at this stuff. And I don't think another candidate out there is going to be tough enough to go against the liberal machine, whether it's Justin Trudeau or whether it's, God forbid, the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. I don't care who they put up, but the Liberal Party is a vicious political machine, and when it's in full mode election action. And I think it's going to be a very tough election. And I think Pierre is up to it, though. And I think we need someone with his stamina and his guts to fight this election, to duke it out with the Liberals and the NDP in this next election.
Well, that's it. I mean, when we try to out-liberal the Liberals, people will just vote Liberal. I mean, if I were a Liberal voter, I've got, well, this is a Conservative pretending to be Liberal, and here's a Liberal who's unapologetically Liberal. I'm going to vote for the Liberal. And meanwhile, the Conservative voters see a Conservative saying he's Liberal, and what do? They stay home. And we saw that with O'Toole. And we'll see it again if we try to stick another pretend Liberal up there. I mean, just
you reminded me of something here, Cory. I really have to do a column about this, because what the Brexit results showed a couple of years back in Britain was that there were about 20% of the electorate was sitting out elections because they just weren't motivated to vote. They didn't think there was enough of a difference, enough of a choice. And they came out for Brexit to overwhelmingly say, no, we don't want to be part of the European Union. And that was the secret of that campaign's success. It wasn't saying we're going to attract the Liberal voters on our side. It was, we're going to get those people who haven't been voting. And that's what Pierre has really been going after. I don't know, consciously or not. I hope so. But his populist message, which is very like what the Republican Party is trying to get out in the States, is that it's not a party that's open to every idea out there, but it's open to everybody out there who wants to be part of this political movement. And it's a conservative populist movement that is attracting blue collar workers, working class people, new immigrants, people who have traditionally not voted conservative are going to be voting conservative in this next election because, quite frankly, the Liberals are bankrupt of ideas and policies, and they're getting excited about this idea of freedom. They're not turned off about freedom. That's why they came to Canada. That's why new immigrants come to Canada. They want to be free. And my goodness, working class people are tired of paying taxes the same way middle class and upper class people are. They're tired of working for the government. So I think we've got a great opportunity here to sell positive conservatism.
Yeah, I believe so too, if it can be done right. And getting on that speculative road, I mean, there's two big speculations, whether or not there'd be a fall election. The other thing you wrote about wondering, well, Trudeau is out languishing in Costa Rica at great expense to all of us. Not that he's cheap for all of us when he's home either. But you think he might be just, making his mind up? Is it time to give it one more kick at the can to try and get a majority, or that he might throw his hands up and say, maybe it's time to walk off into the sunset?
I definitely think he's weighing his career. He's weighing his chances. He's weighing his legacy, because people like Trudeau, who are very, very narcissistic, it's all about legacy for them. They want to leave a legacy behind. And right now, he really doesn't have much of a legacy except legalizing marijuana and being one of the worst prime ministers in the history of this country. So I think he's wondering what he can do to stay in power. I don't think he's really contemplating resignation, but I think he is plotting his return, as it will, and he wants to come back with something. Right now, I think he is in very, very dangerous ground. He's incredibly unpopular. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's delusion. But Justin Trudeau, don't ever think he sells himself short, because he really thinks he has a lot to offer this country.
Yeah. Well, he lives in a special bubble world of his own, I'm sure. I mean, as you said, you can't underestimate that Liberal machine, though. I mean, even if the guy at the head of it isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, they've got some very powerful strategists and connections. That they will be a well-funded campaign, and they just can't be taken lightly. So, I mean, the Conservatives are definitely going to have to go straight into at least election preparation mode the moment they're finished with their leadership race.
Yes, they will, because there's no time to waste with this, and this is going to be a very tough election, as I said. And I think the Conservatives have to be prepared for that, and I think they will be. I mean, they're not naive, and as I said, I think Poilievre he's a tough political character. There's no question about it. He's been there long enough to understand politics is a tough sport.
Yeah, that it most certainly is. Well, I appreciate you coming in to talk to us today, David, and always those prolific Ottawa-based columns coming out from out there. Have you got stuff coming down the pipe you can give us a heads up on, or are you still seeing what you're going to write on next? I know you just put one up a couple hours.
I just put one up next. I'd like to revisit this fertilizer mess, which I had a great time last week talking to former Agriculture Minister Jerry Ritz, which is just going up the turnstile there. Jerry is really motivated to get out about this message that Trudeau is deliberately tampering with our food supply by essentially banning fertilizer because it contains nitrogen, which he thinks is causing greenhouse gases. And he would rather Canadians go without food and starve than emit a few more greenhouse gases. And it's really quite negligible in terms of, is this having any effect on climate change at all? Probably not, because even if we stopped emitting any greenhouse gases in Canada, and if Justin Trudeau stopped flying in his Challenger jet and creating this huge carbon footprint, even if he stopped it, China and India would still be producing much more of these things than we are. So really, I don't think we want to fall on our sword over this. I think we want to keep food production up. And as Jerry points out, there's no more responsible environmental stewards out there than farmers. Farmers are some of the best, but they're being punished by Justin Trudeau because he doesn't think they're important. He doesn't think people who work the land, he doesn't think people who produce the food that he eats, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, he thinks it comes from the grocery store and nothing before that. He doesn't think that's important. And I think that this is an issue. I think it's the most important issue facing Canada right now. And this might destroy Justin Trudeau's political career, because I think there's enough sane people in the Liberal caucus who are saying this is insanity. This is madness. we cannot go down this route because this sounds like a Maoist Great Leap Forward, which ended in catastrophic results.
Well, Canada's agriculture minister just this morning was up saying, no, you guys are misinterpreting. We want a voluntary reduction of 30%. I don't think anybody believes her.
No, it's not voluntary. It won't be voluntary, but the tariff on fertilizer is not voluntary right now. They're not talking about that. We're the only G7 country that's taxing fertilizer out of the market for farmers. They literally will not be able to afford to buy fertilizer. And that's not voluntary. A tariff is a tariff. So don't trust or believe with the Liberal government on this, because they are driven by a radical climate change agenda. And that's really all they care about, is satisfying their masters in the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and the people who are pushing for radical green energy plans.
Yeah, I mean, well, they don't. The elitists who are pushing this don't care if the price of caviar goes up a little for them, but it's going to hurt everybody else in a terrible way if they get these sorts of things pushed through. But all right, well, thank you very much again for coming on and keeping on with these. It's definitely one to follow up on. As you said, this is an issue that could grow big. I mean, it took down a government in Sri Lanka. It's got the Dutch government paralyzed. I mean, I think they've overplayed their hand on this thing, and that might be the catalyst for change in Canada finally.
I hope so. We can only hope and pray. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, good to talk to you, David. It always is. And I look forward to seeing more columns in the coming days.
A pleasure meeting with you again, Cory, and all the best.
Great. Thanks. That is our parliamentary senior columnist there, David Krayden. And yes, he puts up all sorts of great and very popular. I mean, he gets a lot of traffic on those columns, mostly on those issues. He writes on some international stuff too, some things about Trump as I scroll through, and of course, local stuff with Tamara Leach. So always a good conversation with Mr. Krayden when we get him on, and he covers a lot of things there. That food issue, we just can't stress enough how dangerous and crazy this is. I mean, we're going after a need, a true need. I mean, I listen to some fart catchers for the Liberals on Twitter. Sometimes they've been going on about the handgun grab. Nobody needs a handgun. Okay. There's a lot of things we don't need. The only things we need are shelter and food and water. I mean, beyond that, nothing else is a full-out need. The other stuff are things we want, but they make our life more comfortable, and they're better for us. And I don't have to justify what I want to anybody. Well, one thing that is a need then, you idiots, a need is food, and you're attacking it. You're going after fertilizers. It's across the board. Anybody who grows any sort of agricultural crop or food will say, all right, you must have modern fertilizers to get the maximum yield per acre so that you can feed people. So you're going after a need there, you morons. Get out of that. Then you can start fighting with us about the whether or not I have the right to enjoy wants like firearm ownership. It doesn't matter what's a need or not. It's not for you guys to determine. All right. Let's look through a few other things before I close it up here. This is a neat one. Yeah, so this again showing how the efficiency of government. I mean, one of the areas where, you'd think the government would be most efficient, but they don't seem to be not. Or maybe they're not in a hurry on this one. Apparently 9 million Canadians are owed some sort of government cash. And they're going to send out reminders this month to tens of thousands of people. Well, I thought if there's 9 million, you should probably send out more reminders. But anyways, to let them know. They have $1.4 billion worth of uncashed checks on their books. So some of it goes back as far as 1998. So I guess, some people have passed on or left the country or gone to jail or who knows what, and they didn't realize these checks are there. But still, the average amount's $160 that Canadians are owed out there, and CRA theoretically wants to give it back to you. So check things out maybe, guys. If you don't keep good track of your finances and things, have a look. There's online things, there's things to check. Maybe there's some bucks there that you didn't realize you had, and you can always use a few more dollars. Let's see, into the world of the weird. There was a Calgary man who had a $900 trillion lawsuit and was asking for some crazy restraining orders. So his case got thrown out of court by a judge. He was self-representing, but it's good for the legal crazed entertainment factor, I guess, anyways. But the judge even said, I may take judicial notice that this amount is vastly more than Canada's entire gross domestic product of $1.64 trillion. So I'm sure this man will appeal and carry on and try. I know it clogs up our court system, but we might as well laugh a little bit about it. Under the Go Woke, Go Broke file, there's a lawsuit being filed as well. Some companies' alleged failure to develop a wind project in southern Alberta. 4 investors in a wind farm out by Cypress Hills. They're looking for 10.7 million bucks. Well, they invested in a crappy industry, guys. Yeah, burn. So yeah, I guess in 2007, they made some investment and it went south. I mean, Medicine Hat's also where a giant solar farm was put out there, and it ended up losing millions of dollars as well before they shut it down. Again, these alternative energy things, not wise investments, kids, even if they're woke. All right, let's wrap things up here. Tomorrow, I got Marcel Latouche. Come on, we're going to talk a lot of political policy. For those who are familiar with him, he's been on before. He used to run the Institute for Public Sector Accountability. So that's a big task to take on. And he's an author of a number of books. Also going to talk to the Western Standard columnist, Dave Makachuk, and we'll cover some of the latest stuff he's been putting out, including some of the stuff out in China. The pipeline, we're going to be recording that a little later. And David Naylor and Derek Fildebrand, we're all going to talk about the debate and really break that down in full. And that'll come out a little about 7 o'clock tonight. So, yes, all that to check out, guys, plus everything on the westernstandard.news. And I'll see you all again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. sharp. Thanks for joining me today.